Welcome to the Expert Authority Show. Conversations with leaders who aren't just visible, but deeply trusted. This show isn't about tactics or trends. It's about identity and beliefs and the defining moments that shape real authority. Today I'm joined by Robert Kilsby, SAS combat veteran who spent most of his military life as a special operations soldier. Hi, Robert.
Hi there.
Thanks for
Great
joining
to be
us. Yeah. So tell me, Robert, I've heard you talk a lot about being in charge of yourself. What exactly does that mean?
Well, I think, it's an interesting thing, but, throughout our lives, typically, because, life comes in and crunches you and you've got to fit in and all of those things, we end up often, at least in part, living the life that others want of us. When we're little ones, we fit in with their parents. So, they've got to do this, you've got to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. You're getting a role model there, hopefully for the best. But, as you go on in life, there's more and more outside, on the peripheries coming in and trying to influence you and influencing you and moving you in this direction and that direction so you can fit into their life rather than be able to run your own. So it's a really fundamental issue, and so when you're able to be in charge of yourself, that process, and some people never get in charge of themselves, and often most people take a long time to learn this stuff. That's where ultimate freedom lies, because if you can run your own life, in other words, if you can govern yourself before life governs you, that's the ultimate freedom.
Yeah.
You can't be freer than that.
Yeah, I was reading your book just recently, and one of the fundamentals is about ownership.
Yeah,
and you were
absolutely.
talking about how a lot of people blame everyone,
That's right.
everything but themselves, and so you suggest to take a good look in the mirror and put your name at the top of that list.
Yeah, I mean, everyone, well, not everyone, but a lot of people, if they bother, they usually have a list that they, what went wrong. Well, let's put all these reasons why this went wrong. They look back in the negative, if you like, and they'll have all sorts of things. The boss, the government, or the neighbour, or mum and dad, or my siblings, or someone, or the bloke next door, even the weather.
Yeah.
But of course, with the people with those lists, it's almost unheard of to have their own name on the list.
Yeah.
So I've moved on from lists a long, long time ago. But when I did that, I learned first to put my own name top of the list and don't worry about anything else.
Yeah.
And that sort of freed me up big time on this process of becoming in charge of myself. Yeah.
One of the things I loved in your book was a trip that you did when you were 12 years old. Tell me about that, Robert.
Yeah, well, that was there was an interesting thing. I'd been in the bush before. We lived up in a country city up in North and South Australia, and with the Flinders Ranges nearby and all those sort of interesting country, and I figured out that I felt that I was going to be afraid of the dark. I might be afraid of the dark, and so. Even though I didn't know these fundamental principles then, I was actually acting them out from that early age. And I said to my father, I reckon I'm afraid of the dark, so I've got to fix that. And he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'd like to go for a bushwalk myself through the Flinders Ranges for a couple of days and just by myself and see if I am afraid of the dark and see what I am afraid of. And my dad, being a wise rock, he said, okay, how do you want to do that? He didn't say, no, you can't do that. My mum freaked out a little bit, being mother of a son. But he said, righto. So he gave me a bit of a safety brief and I'd done sort of, bushwalking with other people. I'd been in the Boy Cubs and the Boy Scouts and things like that. And it was always with a group or, with adult supervision and things like that.
Yeah.
So I decided I was going to do this, and my dad said, okay, all right, we'll support you. Off you go. And so we packed up and they dropped me off on the highway, the Adelaide-Port Augusta highway, and I headed off across this big paddock, which my mother noted there was a big bull in, actually, the big paddock, and so she was worried about that. She said, actually, that all I could see was this great big pack with two little legs sticking out from underneath, staggering across this paddock, with the Flinders Ranges in the distance. And so I went through there, and I'd been that route before, so I generally knew the way up through the wilderness there. And so I got there, and I got myself a lovely little campsite next to this babbling brook, and really nice things, few little pine tree grove, and so I got out there and I cooked my baked beans up, and I had I remember my rice pudding in those days was a big hit, and I had that just getting cold in the creek and so on. And anyway, so I had set up my tent, and I sat there with my little fire, and after a while the wind began to blow a little bit, and moonlight flitting through the trees and noises I couldn't understand. I thought, well, I'll just retire to the tent now. So I got in there, and I had two sheath knives, one small one medium size, and I had a great big Bowie knife that my young uncle had made out of a car spring. So I had three big knives, and I put them out on my ground sheet there in the tent. I zipped up the tent and I thought, anyone comes through the door, I'm going to get them, and so I was a bit worried, but anyway, so I slept like a baby and got up in the morning. It was absolutely brilliant, and I've never been scared of the dark ever since. And then I just walked the rest of the way right up through the hills, and got picked up by Mum and Dad on the, eventually at the other end of this trip. So it was an interesting story because you think of how many parents would I'm just 12 at the time, let their kids go off and do that sort of stuff. So. Yeah. I was pretty fortunate with my parents. They were brilliant.
Yeah. And other than overcoming your fear of the dark, what else did that trip teach you about yourself?
Well, I think it teach me, I was brought up, I had a really good upbringing, I must say, and, all kudos to my parents, they're brilliant. I was brought up to be independent and have a crack, right? Have a go. They sort of overwatched me, so I didn't do anything too stupid, obviously. Mm. But, I did a lot of adventurous things, and they allowed me to do that as long as I, did the right preparation and got ready, and I didn't do it, off the last half inch of the cuff.
Yeah.
And so what I learned from that was, in a sense, that you can do a lot of things as long as you prepare for them properly.
Yeah. Which
is, it's the way special operations work. They can do marvellous things, but everyone says, how can you do that? Mm. But they really rehearse everything, and they get everything down pat, and they rehearse and rehearse and rehearse. And, they train hard, play easy, right?
Yeah.
So I learned that very early in life. And the other thing is that you're only limited by your imagination. So, knowledge is one thing, but it's contained. Mm. So don't just do the things you know, look further afield, and, all things that were thought to be impossible in human history, were all thought to be impossible before they were attempted and done.
Yeah, yeah.
So that lesson came early to me, through a variety of activities that I did, and, I'm forever grateful to my parents and other people close to me.
And you've got kids and grandkids.
Oh, absolutely.
Did you send them off into the bush for their leadership, self-leadership
we've always,
skills?
I've sort of tried to, bring our children up in a similar way, and I've sort of adopted the saying, which I like to put in the books I sign for people, is do your best today and enhance that tomorrow. Nice. And that's about the best thing you can tell kids.
Yeah.
And keep them to it.
Yeah.
Because what else is there? I mean, why fill your life up with easy stuff? That's the other thing. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
It's not, it's sort of okay, but it's pretty routine. And
yeah.
And the great rewards in life come from doing things difficult.
Yep.
Doing difficult things which are difficult to achieve. you're uncomfortable. That's the only where growth comes from.
Yeah.
And if you're not uncomfortable, you're not learning anything.
Yeah.
We learn from defeats, not victories, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and the other thing is, for people, a lot of people think in the past, a lot. But, we only regret actually the things we don't do in life, not what we do. Because when we do something and it, even if you make a mistake or it's an error or something, it doesn't work out too well.
Yeah.
That always brings other things to the table. It brings growth and, because you're learning from that.
Mm.
I mean, imagine if you're riding your bicycle when you're a kid and you fell off once and your parents come up and said, "Oh, okay, there's no more bike riding for you, it's dangerous stuff." Right?
Yeah, yeah.
No, but we don't say that as parents, do we? Say, "No, come on, dust yourself down, Jack, get back on the bike.
Yeah.
Learn from that. Don't fall off that way or that way."
Yeah.
And that's the way humans learn. And so I've just done that all my life. And I've learned from it. I must admit, one superpower I've got is that I've got 65 years of observed experience.
Yeah.
A lot of people got experience, but they don't necessarily observe it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting. And someone said to me, I said, I've got a lot of people say in business, they say, I've got 20 years experience. You often, you should buy this car because I'm a good mechanic or something. I've got 20 years experience. And I asked a very wise builder one time, I said, how come all you builders have got 20 years experience? And he said, well, actually, most people have got 1 year's experience repeated 19 times.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing, all this stuff. So, that's that's the substance of the book, in fact, 5 fundamental principles to being in charge of yourself, ultimate freedom.
Yeah, yeah. And so tell me about when you were in Vietnam. Like, tell me about a time there where you had a significant challenge that you had to deal with leading your team, or that you had to overcome, and you put these principles in place.
Yeah, I wasn't a team leader there. I was a baby of the patrol.
Okay.
Right? So I was a very unusual character. There's only a handful of people that have been in my situation. So I was selected into the SAS, which is a very hard thing to get to. Mm. I think someone figured out there was something like 186 people applied, throughout the military, the army, and I think about 86 something started. So I've been told. I was oblivious to these figures because I didn't, it was just me going to selection. And at the end of the course, in those days, it was a fairly long, a lot longer course, and obviously fairly rigorous. Although I loved it, I thought it was okay. So 23 of us finished, successfully finished, and 6 of us passed out of 186 applicants. And I was actually only just turned 18 when I did that, so I was very young. And the average age of people going through there was 22, 23 or something. I mean, I was fully qualified badged SAS operator as a patrol medic, in fact, as well, before I was 18 and a half. When you think of a lot of the kids at school these days, and, a lot of them are 18 and things like that. So different times, and there was a war on, Mm. I reckon they selected me because they liked my jokes, I always say. But it was obviously from the pass rate, it's pretty difficult to be, and it's difficult to stay there. You've got to perform at a very high level all the time. So I went to war with 2 squadron SAS, and I was a scout in a patrol. Now, the scout is the guy out the front, so everything in front of me was enemy, so to speak, and we were behind the line, so there wasn't any support or anything like that. So I was the guy, the sharp of the sharp end, and my patrol commander, who was a really good soldier, really good leader, he was behind me, and every time there was danger or I sensed danger or whatever, he'd come right up near me. He's a very, very great soldier. And so we, you go through a lot of high tense. It's jungle warfare, right? So could be all over in 3 seconds. You don't know. You can't see very far. So you've got to be very, very slow, very quiet and so on. But I loved it. I loved operations. I'm a warrior character, so I loved it. And it was interesting. My son, later on, he was a very good soldier in the infantry battalion, did 3 tours of East Timor and one of the Solomons as well in around the 2000 mark. And the only thing he sent back to us was a postcard, and he said, "Dad, I love operations." And I went, "Yes." So he was a very good soldier, and turned out to be a really good policeman as well. But going back to Vietnam, there were quite a number of times where it was difficult. I was just thinking about this the other day. We weren't. When I say it's difficult, we weren't concerned or worried or anything, but we were very, very meticulous about doing our job particularly well. And as a result, we had fantastic results, Virtually lost no one at all. We lost a handful of people, some, injuries and wounded and so on. But I always said I love the SAS because they had low casualties. I thought that's a good mob to join, But had to earn it. So there was a few things. Even if you don't see the enemy, they can be very close. So the tension level is very high, right? So it's very, very hard on the average person would find that very difficult on the psychology, the being able to put up with that pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, it's interesting. And there's a picture of me at the end of my last patrol with the old 1,000-yard stare, and we just got off the chopper back to base there. And if you survive your last patrol, the patrol gets a magnum of champagne. They give you, that was good, the last patrol. And so I've got a picture of myself with this magnum of champagne on my leg there, standing on full rig and looking pretty bedraggled. But I thought of later on, actually, the drinking age in Australia at that time was 21. So I was an underage drinker as well as a teenage gunslinger. I was only 19 then. So yeah. So it was a very challenging thing, but I loved it, and because I was doing exactly what I was trained for, and I was right into it.
Yeah. What do you think was the thing behind you being able to cope with that immense pressure that other people would have crumbled?
Well, I think it comes back to a lot of preparation. Also, it's what we call these days mission critical teams, and high performance teams. But it's not a hierarchical thing. It's not this guy tells this guy, this tells that guy, tells that guy. It's very collegiate. You take fully accountability. You take full ownership of everything. It's decentralised command in a sense, within that small group. And, that was the same for, larger groups of SAS operations and so on as well. And it's still to this day,
Yeah.
If you don't have that decentralised thing, you have to depend on the guy above you or something. And not all smart things come from the leader. And if the leader's really smart, he'll know that and really use the whole team as a full team in a resource. So that was where I first learned that premise. I mean, I'd been playing sport before that, a lot of sport and so on, but it's not at that sort of level, mission critical stuff,
Yeah.
So I think that not just that tour, which was, I think it was close to 8.5 months or something, which is a hard thing to do when you're under that tension a lot. I fought with the SEAL team as well, and did some weird sort of missions with them, and they were warriors like us, so we got on real well, But I think you learn a lot from these things, and I sort of, through most of my life, I always said, well, I was just doing my job, I was just I didn't think much of it really, because when you're selected for those sort of units, it's all about you getting up again. Who can get up again once the bad things happen. And and that's not resilience, that's more than resilience. Resilience is being able to take the pressure or do this and that, but in that sort of style, it's who's going to get up and keep on going and get up again and get up again and get up again. And, mission orientation.
Yeah.
It's a really, really interesting. In fact, some of that's going to be in my second book, which I've embarked on now, on a higher level of leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it was a sort of I call it my first battlefield, not just Vietnam, but my first battlefield was those years as a child through to being a soldier and, for 22 years. And I always did most of it was in special operations of some sort, intelligence, whatever. So I always pushed myself to do things that were difficult, and I've had to untrain myself a few times to come back to reality, especially in the second battlefield, as I call it, once I transitioned out of the military. And now I'm in the dog-eat-dog world of the civilian life and all those sort of things. Everyone's trying to sell you something. Yeah. All of that normal crunch. I call it, these days especially, I call it the information bombardment age, because, there's so many things coming at you from all different directions all the time. Yeah. But not just, I'm not talking business now, I'm everything, life, relationships, the whole shooting match, So I think it's so I call it the second battlefield. Once I got into that, this is just so one of my statements is that sport, business, and warfare are all the same activities. It's just the stakes that are different. So the activity, the procedures, and all those sort of things are pretty similar, but the stakes are different for different things. Yeah. And that's been a real sort of a golden thread, really, through my life, the way I think of stuff. So we're now in the second battlefield. I did a lot of things. I was a crisis and emergency management practitioner, for some number of years, and that was really good. I sort of worked with big business teams, in many countries as well as Australia, and saw it from that side of the things. And this is where I gleaned about my sport, business, warfare statement. I've coached sports teams, and I've been involved with representative sport, and so this is what I meant about this observed experience. So you can work these things out if you think about it. First, second stage thinking, third stage thinking. I got to admit that most of my life I felt like a bit of an alien, because I remember talking about the ultimate freedom, the principles there. I was pretty lucky you make your own luck, don't you? And your personality moves you towards whatever destiny. But when I was, in school, a big thing for teenagers and school kids is to, they want to fit in and be in this group or that group and, be loved and all the rest of it, and fit in and feel quite comfortable like that. Whereas in my school years, all through them, I got to admit that I never felt that way. I was accepted by every group, because I'm very interested in people and people around me, and I could contribute and all those sort of things to every group. So they all were very happy to see me there and be part of the group. But I never was owned by one group. I was never one group. And in fact, I think about it, it's probably lucky that I found special operations in the army, so I could be asymmetrical, a bit different sort of thing. I always used to say in the SAS, I was different because I was normal. But so the fit-in thing is where this ultimate freedom comes from, because most people want to fit in, especially as children, as teenagers. Yeah. So I was sort of living this really from a young age, as you've seen in the book, and that's what I've tried to expound that in the book, that ultimate freedom is when you actually been able to govern yourself, lead yourself, it's very hard to lead others if you can't lead yourself.
Yeah.
You know, you can sort of do it when it's routine, but up at the high levels, you know, when there's pressure on, adverse circumstances, all of that, it gets very fragile, you know, if you can't lead yourself, and it starts to crumble a bit, you know.
Yeah.
And with the detriment being usually other people pay for the price, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, your team and other people,
Yeah. So you've written this book, Robert. Why now?
Well, that brings me to my third battlefield. So my second battlefield was good, and in fact, one of my big things was, you know, the most meaningful thing that I was able to do is to I got to admit that motorsport sort of saved me really, going into motorsport, because after the missions had started to wrap up with the crisis management and things like that and other things I was doing, I'm very mission oriented, so I started thinking, well, what's now? And I must admit, I had fantastic coping mechanisms. You asked this, sort of alluded to this question before. I had really, really good coping mechanisms from warfare and all of those sort of things. In fact, eventually, so I was a latecomer to the diagnosis of PTSD, for example, quite late. Some of it came from that I didn't appreciate the way some people were what I call rorting the system, you know. Not the majority, but, you know, just a significant sort of minority in my view. And I wasn't going to be one of those guys, right? So I held off. But in the end, I sort of went through the process to finding out more about this, you know, for my wife really, to help her with her own security in life and so on. And I did it the wrong way, you know. Typically, you know, first go I did it roundabout face sort of thing. I didn't use the government system. I made my own system up and I went that way. But it was an interesting thing which I learned from. And I went to a very, very credited psychiatrist who had a lot to do with Vietnam veterans, because a lot of Vietnam veterans have knocked themselves off and things like that, you know. So it's a difficult time. Anyway, so I went there and I had about 6 or 7 visits with her, and she was really good. But this time I said, right, I won't sell myself. I'll just answer her damn questions, answer her questions properly. And she, at the end of that, she had a great big fat file on me, like it was nearly an inch thick. And I said, well, what do you got in there? You know, she said, well, this is you in there. I said, oh, really? Nah, it couldn't be. And she said, well, look. And I said, well, what's your verdict, Your Honour? You know? And she said, well, you actually, because she was very experienced with Vietnam veterans, she said, you've got one of the worst cases of PTSD in a Vietnam veteran I've seen, right to my face. Right? I went, oh, okay, well, that's pretty interesting. And then she said, but on the other hand, you've also got the best coping mechanisms I've ever seen in a Vietnam veteran. I went, oh, okay, because I'm not sort of, I didn't say what's the best coping mechanism I have and go for it. I just do my stuff, right? And keep moving, you know. It's always too soon to quit stuff.
Yeah.
And she said, yeah, in fact, so good that I'd like you to come back and I'm going to get 6 of my colleagues in this room here and you're going to tell them how you do that stuff. And I said, nah, they do a bridge too far, you know. No, I thought it's hard enough coming each session with you and, you know, being vulnerable in a sense, you know. So that was a bridge too far, so I didn't do that. But it was very interesting, and anyway. So mission started to unravel later on, you know, in the 2002, 3, 4 sort of thing, and my coping mechanisms were still there, but I couldn't see the meaning behind them in a sense. So I was starting to go out the room backwards, you know. And so what I did was I even tried to change my personality so I could fit in with my family and things like that better. But of course that's impossible, you know, it's just misery really. So within a very short time, I figured, well, that's no good. So I decided to catch my thoughts and, don't let it go down that pipeline. And around about the same time, I found motorsport. And I was actually doing up some cars, Alfa Romeos. I'm an Alfa Romeo crazy. And I was doing a couple of Alphas up for my sons and give them something as I went out the back door, right? And I went to the Alpha Club and I found that a whole bunch of those guys were out racing their Alphas around the track. And the old candle started to flicker, the old competition candle come up and, well, that might be something to do while I'm going out. So I got into that, and then that sort of saved me really. And I started thinking, well, what's the hardest thing I can do here? Like the old Robert came back, And then I fortuitously I found that the meaningful thing to do would be to get recovering veterans and get physically and psychologically recovering veterans from the ills to be on teams, with me in a rally, tarmac rally team, at the national level, right up there. And so we did that, and I spent quite a number of years doing that and forging through with sponsorships and all sorts of things, and that was really beaut. And all of this time, that's my second battlefield. All of that. So later on, I survived. I paddled my sea kayak 2,450 clicks down the Murray River for the cause of homeless veterans. I actually, incidentally, sort of raised $25,000 for that, even though it wasn't my main mission. My main mission was just to build awareness that there was a lot of veterans, who were homeless. It's a shocking statistic. And got back in time for my 70th birthday, And people ask me, well, what was that like? Did you enjoy that? And I said, well, it was all right. I thought it was a bit arduous. And about a month later, when I got back, just in time for my 70th, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, right? And I thought, this is a new mission. Now I'm up against another black dog here. I've got to do this, right? So that was good. I didn't mind. People apparently, a lot of people say, they went to pieces when they told me, But I thought, this is a new mission. This is good. And so I spent all of 2021. So the kayak trip was in 2021. So all of 2022 was in diagnosis, treatment, and recovery, for the cancer. And then so I got back into the motorsport in 23, and then I found that a few things were going astray. And then 24, in about mid 2024, I had double open heart surgery. So I had 2 open heart surgeries within about 4 days. And after that, later on, several months ago, or about a year ago, I had a defibrillator, like what do they call it? The TikTok they put in your chest or whatever.
Yes, pacemaker.
Pacemaker, that's the one. Yeah. And I said, well, Doc, to the specialist, who's a great cardio, and I said, what does this do? And he said, well, what it does is if your heart races too long, even more than several seconds, then it's going to give you a little bit of a tickle. And I said, what sort of tickle is that? And he said, 800 volts in your chest, bang, like a hammer in the chest, right? And at that point, so I absorbed that, and I thought, okay, move on. So what do I do about that? So it's not about what happens in life, obviously, right? That it happens to you. It's what you do about what happens that matters. Right?
Yeah.
As you know. It was at that point I decided I have to retire as a rally driver. Just like that. Even though I've been doing it for 15, 16 years. Mm. And done a lot of majors. I've done 6 Target Tasmanias and a whole bunch of other majors, right? So it was something I really loved to do, and it was good and it was difficult to do. It was like going to war, really, in many ways. But I retired as a rally driver because of the duty of care to my navigator hurtling along with me at 200 clicks through an hour through the country roads, you know. And if I got a big sledgehammer in the chest in the middle of all that, well, I couldn't guarantee his safety or her safety.
Yeah.
You know, so it was pretty straightforward. And then I thought, well, that's the end of the second battlefield. And so what am I going to do now? Well, I'd been thinking about, you know, this and that, and I've always mentored and coached people and trained people and all sorts of things through my life. I said, well, okay, well, I've heard that keynote speaking is pretty hard. Maybe I'll have a crack at that. And as soon as I decided to do that, and, you know, really fortuitously, I by chance, I found Speakers Institute, which I've been with ever since, and, you know, very grateful for all the training and all the knowledge that I can do. I mean, I've done a lot of speaking in my time, but keynote speaking is difficult. You know, I mean, it's sort of like climbing Mount Everest, and I'm trying to get to base camp now.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it takes a long while to be really good, and I'm not interested in just being average, right? It's not my style. So and then I realised pretty quick that my message, which is, you know, ultimate freedom, be in charge of yourself, which I've been living decades and decades, and that was what I got back on that track again, and that saved me again. You know, I realised that. You know, who am I to give out principles? Well, so, it sounds like I need a book, you know, because that's my credibility in a sense, you know.
Yeah.
If I can articulate that in obvious, you know, authoritative terms, then, you know, that'll help me with being able to stand up and deliver that on stage to all sorts of audiences, you know.
Yeah.
So that's why I wrote the book as my IP, effectively, you know, my intellectual property.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm embarking on a second book, is in that same strategic arc of leadership.
Yeah.
So this is sort of book is self mastery.
And who's the book? Who would you say the book is for?
Well, I'd say it's from 16 to 60.
Yeah.
You know, it's for. I remember when I first went to Speakers Institute, and they said, well, you know, who, what's this message? What's your message for? And I said, everybody. And they said, no, it can't be everybody. That's too general. But actually, it's very good for everybody, you know. And even we're talking off air, you know, before about even primary school kids, for example, you know, especially with a bit of parental guidance, it'd be good for them. It's all about the things that make you very, very strong in life, you know.
Yeah.
Accountability. Don't blame the other kids, you know. It wasn't me you're on, it was 6 other blokes, you know.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I said. I think this book is a great handbook for parents.
Yeah.
And I love that you've got exercises in here
little
they
ones,
can do. Because a lot of the habits that we form are way before 16.
Oh, yeah. No,
And
absolutely.
if we had these tools going through the really difficult teenage years, I think the world would be a better place.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people have read the manuscript. You know, I gave it out to a number of people to read, and many of them came back and said, this will be good for parents and students, you know. And in fact, if students can grab hold of these principles and put them into action, they're going to be superb adults by the time they're in their 20s.
Yeah, well, I know as a parent, Robert, I was always looking for the manual, but I feel I've found it now.
Oh, that's very kind of you.
Yeah. I really just want to say thank you for joining us on the show. But
It's been a great pleasure.
One last thing that I like to ask all my guests. If we took away all of your medals, all of your awards and achievements, who is Robert Kilsby?
Well, I think I'm an independent character willing to have a crack. You know, I haven't changed. Someone said, I love the way you operate. You know, it was actually a couple of friends and family have said this to me. I love the way you operate. You know, you're always reinventing yourself. And I thought about, no. Reinventing, I'm not reinventing. That means starting from scratch again. I'm just reassigning.
Yes. I love that you've always got a mission. And I always say to my kids, what are you working on? What are you working towards?
Yeah.
You've got a project. There's always going to be difficult times in our life and things that just throw us.
Yeah.
But if you've got something that you're working towards, which it sounds like you've always had a mission.
Always.
And I think that's key to just being in charge of yourself, really.
Yeah, well, that's right. I think a really good question to ask ourselves, in the mirror or otherwise, is what am I studying today? I'm not talking about university or whatever. I'm not talking about that. Well, what are you studying today? If you're a hairdresser, are you studying new techniques in hairdressing? Are you studying new products? Are you studying the market to help more people to have better hair? Or, what are you studying today, whether you're a neurosurgeon or a plumber? I think it's really important. And it's a bit like, I sort of equate it to a pond, If there's no water flowing in the pond, that pond is dying. It's stagnant, right? Yeah. The water's dying, and you won't find life in there much after a while. It's only when the water's flowing, and that's uncomfortable, can be dangerous. So I love the Chinese description through their characters. I'm a Chinese linguist, right? And their word for crisis comes in two characters. The first one is danger, and the second one is opportunity. So crisis to the Chinese in their thing is dangerous opportunity. So let's have more crisis.
Well, that's where the growth comes, which is what you've shared.
Exactly, Mel. Yeah,
in today's show.
Yeah,
so
brilliant.
Thank you so much. I wish you all the best with your next mission to be a well-known, established, well-paid keynote speaker.
That's where we're going.
And I know that you'll get there. And I really just thank you for putting this book together to be that legacy piece for yourself and your family, but also it's going to help a lot of people. Yeah,
it's very useful. So I really thank you for the opportunity to be able to talk to you again. It's fantastic. And I'm looking forward to watching the after effect.
See you on the big stage, Robert.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Expert Authority Show, where we bring you the stories behind the authorities that you know, like, and trust. We'll see you next time.